Okay.
Uh-huh. Okay, we are now live, but I have to do a couple more things.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Okay, we are now live. Okay. Oh, actually, we're ahead of schedule. I shouldn't do it until 12:30. We don't actually have that many people watching us live anyway. The ones who do watch us live are mostly people who just happen to be, grazing around, browsing around the YouTube and bump into us accidentally while it's live. But most of the people who watch us wait until I've edited it and put on a soundtrack of music, or play with it a little bit and post it, and then they'll look at it.
Okay.
But I don't want to go live until 12:30 in case one of our regulars is actually tuning in exactly at 12:30 to hear us, which is probably not the case. Anyway, it's where are you now? Where are you sitting?
I live in Old Town Alexandria, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, is here. Thank you. Bye. Okay, bye. That's my assistant. I was going to have him call you if it didn't look like you're turning up, but you are. You're outside of Washington,
Right.
and you're at home now. Okay.
I am.
Okay, but you do go to Notre Dame.
I do. In the fall, I teach a course every fall that I've been teaching now for about 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called The Ethics of Emerging Weapons Technology.
Mm-hmm. Well, that I think is a very important thing for us to talk about. And we have an article coming up in the issue of the magazine that's just about to go to press, except it's not press anymore, it's all online.
Of course.
But at any rate, we're about ready to send it off, and we have one on the new technologies being used in Ukraine. So I'll probably ask you about that. All right, we are now live, and I'm going to get going. Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. Today, we're going to have a conversation about military intelligence, and I get to talk to a U.S. Major General. I can't remember the last time I talked to a general at all. I guess the last time must have been our own Major General Leonard Johnson, who died about 15 years ago, I think. So don't have that many generals in my address book. Now I have at least one. And this is Major General Robert Latif, who is, I'm told, sitting in his home someplace near Washington, D.C. And when he's not there, he is sometimes, and in the falls, usually in Notre Dame University, which is his alma mater, and where he teaches a course on intelligence, or rather on ethics, military ethics, ethics of warfare. Oh boy, that's a loaded subject. Mm-hmm. And I imagine in your career, you have found some strains and stresses trying to come to terms with your ethics. Is that a good probability that you had?
Yeah, that's true. Issues? Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I've actually written about it. I've written a couple of books and talked about a couple of the things that I experienced in my career.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start right there. Why not? I don't have an agenda planned out. All these things are all spontaneous, mm-hmm. and that's probably the first thing I would be curious about. Is I do have one other friend who is a military man. He's not a general. In fact, he's not in the Army, but is teaching at a military university. In fact, I have 2 or 3 teaching at a military institution. So I can't claim to be completely devoid of military contacts, but I haven't really discussed it with any of my other friends. So why don't I start with you? What you say you have written about this? That the question of when do you pull the trigger? Do you have that? Do you ever get that close to?
No, not in my career. The timing of my background was such that I pretty much stayed in the very high tech area. So I didn't see combat in Vietnam. I was too late for that. But early in my career, I spent some time in the Army before I switched to the Air Force. And when I was in the Army, I commanded a tactical nuclear weapons unit.
Mhm.
And I mean, it was all super interesting and very serious. But, and when you think about what you might end up eventually having to do, it played upon you. So,
Yeah.
I had to think about that quite a bit.
Well,
What
there are people who are in that situation who simply didn't do what they're supposed to do. I mean, I'm thinking of Stanislav Petrov. Is that his name?
Petrov, yeah, the Russian lieutenant
Russian
colonel.
guy. Yeah. I mean, he just disobeyed. And
Yeah.
I don't know how many people would do that. What do you think? Do you think most of the people you knew and were working with, if they were told that they should, launch a tactical nuclear weapon, would just say, okay, here goes?
No, I think many of them would. Most, if not all of them, would think very carefully about it before they did it. How they would come down on the side of the decision, I have no way of knowing. I suspect that most military people would do what they were ordered to do, because just most people are just trained to be that way, and not that they're not thoughtful, but if all military people were then to say, well, I'm going to question every order I get, then it would be chaos. So fortunately, we were never faced with that. But my point was that, and I think it was true of all of my contemporaries, that they thought very hard about, it played upon your mind that at some point you may actually have to do this. And so you debated with yourself.
Yeah. I'm comparing that to what I think Dave Grossman said about, I think he wrote about the history of, people who, it used to be a large proportion of the military people would not obey. They would either fire over the heads of their enemies or at the ground or something, or it just wouldn't, they'd count up the bullets afterward and realize that they weren't really trying to shoot anybody.
Yeah, I just referenced his book in a meeting in Italy last week.
Yeah. But he said, if I'm not mistaken, and this is about 10 years ago or more that I read the book, that they've gotten better about training people to do it like a reflex. They put up things and pop up dummies that come out, and you're supposed to shoot them as fast as possible, et cetera. So they've got people to doing it like instantly without thinking as part of the training, and that the rate of people who are willing to pull the trigger has increased. So it's like the military has figured it out. Do you does that apply to what you're saying about the people in charge of nuclear weapons?
No.
And by the way, does it matter to you whether what you're going to shoot is a tactical nuclear weapon or something, much bigger, a Bravo type style of weapon? Because a tactical one theoretically is only about the size of a Hiroshima bomb, a little bitty thing,
Yeah, I don't make any distinction. I think they're all
Okay.
immoral, awful. And some wag said, all nukes are strategic nukes. So no,
Mm,
It's just a matter of scale, I think, rather than essence. But to your question, no, I think the two are completely different. So if you're in a firefight, you don't really have time to really be thinking about it. And most well-trained soldiers do think about it, particularly if there are civilians around.
mm,
But if it's a firefight with another combat unit, you're not thinking. You're basically just trying to survive and get out of there alive, I guess. But no, what I'm talking about with the nuclear weapons is, I mean, it's nowhere near that kind of in-your-face violence. It's something that bears reflection.
oh, absolutely. I mean, I've spent a lot of my life trying to figure out how to get them destroyed.
Yeah,
Haven't made a bit of progress, as far as I can tell.
that's
Do
getting
you?
worse.
It is getting worse. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I that's what other people say, and I don't have an opinion, but it certainly, there are moments when it looks much more imminent. When Dmitry Medvedev talks the way he does nowadays,
Mhm.
he's I'm glad he's not in charge of making the decision at the moment.
No, I think they're all kind of interchangeable, but that's a personal opinion. Um,
You think all the people who are in charge of nuclear forces are pretty much set to go ahead and use them?
well, I was referring more to the Russian leadership, not everybody. No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, uh, I know a lot of the senior decision makers in the military, knew of them. I've retired years ago, but and to the man, and they were all men. They were all very thoughtful individuals. Given an order to execute a nuclear attack, I think they would have been, again, they have to abide by the rules of war, but and rules of military command. But I think they would all have been very thoughtful about it.
Question is which way they would go.
The question is which way they would go. I think the saner heads in the military would consider the situation, and if it was a real no kidding situation, they probably would do what they had to do. If it was a shoot from the hip, knee jerk, I'm just going to do this kind of thing, maybe not. I don't know.
Mhm.
Anyway, they are all the ones that I ever knew were very professional, very thoughtful. Many of them were actually quite intellectual.
Okay.
I have no question that they would have given a great deal of thought to it.
Mm. But we still have tactical nuclear weapons in Europe that are American, or NATO's, but I guess they're all American.
Reportedly, yes.
Uh, uh, and occasionally you hear a little bit about it, but mostly it's as if those don't count. They don't seem to. People don't seem to object somehow to tactical nuclear weapons. Am I making that up, or is that impression based on anything other than?
Well, first of all, up until recently, people didn't object to nuclear weapons of any kind because they didn't even pay attention to them. It's only been in the last year that people have started hearing more about nuclear weapons and worrying more about them, other than people like ourselves. And let's not forget that the Russians still maintain probably 10 times the number of tactical nuclear weapons that we have. They never destroyed all theirs. They just put them in storage.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I
You
hadn't
can
heard.
find the numbers. Yeah.
I hadn't heard that.
Oh yeah.
Why don't I know that?
I don't know. I mean, they're all counted in the numbers, and so they have a lot of tactical nukes. We don't. We may, again,
we're just talking about tactical weapons now. We're
Yeah,
not talking about, okay, all right, because I was thinking they have counts of, all the big ones. don't
oh
they?
yeah, we have counts of, those are all counted in the numbers.
I
I'm just
see.
saying that some
Okay.
number of theirs remain tactical in nature. We did not maintain very many tactical nuclear weapons
Okay,
because we didn't really have a need for them.
okay,
So,
okay, all right. Well, okay, well, I guess I always have to prioritize which things to worry about the most. And somehow. Well, let me move over to the other angle. Your CV, or what, I didn't see a CV, but whatever shows up on Google, said that you were in charge of intelligence. So that's what I thought. Let's talk about the intelligence gathering about emerging technologies, that is new weapons, fancy new experimental type weapons.
so let me just kind of correct that. I'm not sure what the thing says about being in charge of intelligence. I worked in building intelligence gathering systems,
Mhm.
none of which I can talk about
Okay.
still to this day.
Uh-huh.
But that was different. That was more, buying things and building things. And, but in terms of the new technologies, if we can talk about the new technologies so that I teach about.
Okay. Yeah, that's sort of where I'm thinking I'd like to go. But also more generally about intelligence in general,
Mhm.
Because if I were going to pick a military role to play, I think I might even be willing to be a spy, or to do the equivalent in terms of collecting intelligence.
Mhm.
I once was having lunch at the UN, in the UN cafeteria, with William Epstein, who
Mhm.
was a Canadian who had worked at the UN all his adult life. I think that's the only job he ever had.
Mhm.
He was at the UN even before it existed as the United Nations. It was a PrepCom or something.
Mhm.
And so we were having lunch in this huge cafeteria, and I looked around and I said, I bet you there are a lot of spies in this room. And he said, yeah, and it's a good thing too. He said, spies are really good for peace, that people are better off if they know what everybody else is up to and thinking. And it shocked me at the time, but it has really stayed with me. Maybe spies are really, maybe spying is a good thing. Tell me, do you believe that, or is that?
Oh, I think on balance, it probably is. I mean, there are certain things that governments want to keep very closely held. And if they're good at it, they will. I mean, if they have loose security, they won't. Uh, um, I don't know very much about spies. I'm not in that part of the business. Never was, never will be. Mine is more about just the technical side of collection. You know, how you collect it, how you process it, how you disseminate it, all the systems that are involved, and that kind of thing. So it's
So you can't talk about that because there's still gadgets that they're using that
right,
they don't want us to know about.
right, right. But
Okay.
but your question about spying and intelligence, the whole intelligence business, I think is probably a valid one. It's there are things that uh, if we can determine through intelligence or even open sources, how the other side is thinking.
Mhm.
Just because they have a whole bunch of weapons doesn't necessarily mean anything. If we can determine how they're thinking, that goes a long way to, tell us how we should react. And the one way to do that is through, again, open sources or spying or
Mhm.
stealing secrets or however it's done. So yeah, I think it's unbalanced spying is probably a good thing.
Uh-huh. All right. I'm open to that. And in fact,
Yeah.
I probably sort of live by that principle that I do believe in being as transparent as I can be,
Mhm.
just telling the truth when even, it's not comfortable.
Right.
Not that I am always live by my principles, but I'm, I'm a coward like anybody
You
else.
try, you try your hard, try your best.
I do occasionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's if everybody really believed that, what we would do is we would invite, say, the Russians to sit in on conferences at the Pentagon as the war planners uh, convene, and expect to Putin to invite us into the Kremlin with our spies. I mean, that'd be how far would you go with your principle if you believe that, obviously nobody lives by the the principle that spying is a good thing, or we'd allow for it. But how far would you go with that principle?
Uh, I'd have to have a particular scenario to think about. No, I don't think, I I think all nations have levels of information that they need to use and maintain for the good order of the country and the way it operates, et cetera. I mean, so for instance, you wouldn't want important economic data necessarily to be free and open. Um,
Well, I think I would. I think corporations have plans for what they're going to do, which we know that if we could tell in advance that they're going to wreck a whole landscape or ruin the ecology, that people would step in so they don't let that get known. So I think that if we had more transparency in requiring corporations to make their plans available and transparent,
I
it
don't,
would be the thing.
I don't dispute that. I'm just talking
Mm.
about, for national priorities for trade or those kind of things might be something that a nation would want to not be completely open about, because nations are vying for uh, uh, superiority or supremacy on the world stage, whatever. You want your balance of trade to be better than their balance of trade. So, but getting back to your question, I think there are some things that just need to remain within the government. There are some things that maybe you could say something about, and then there are probably some things that need to be open. Uh, things that
Yeah.
deal with the health and well-being of populations
Mhm.
shouldn't be held. They should be transparent between nations. So I think there are levels. I don't think that everything just should be completely open.
Well, I mean, I'm glad they are not making clear the chemical formula for certain kinds of poison gas or Novichok or something like that, so tell you where you could get the ingredients, and so
Yeah.
everybody could go make their own or something. Who knows what people would do. So certainly, I do think there's some things I don't want to have publicized.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
all right, we can agree on that. Tell me what your students think, because you must every year meet a new class of students, a different cohort. And,
Mhm.
I haven't taught now. I was a professor of sociology at the University of Toronto and peace studies. The main thing
Mhm.
I did was peace studies. But
Mhm. I have
I
peace
haven't
study
taught now.
students in my class.
Good. Well,
Yeah.
I haven't done it for, a number of years now. So I don't know what's going on in the minds of the students, but they would take my class, and many of them would major in peace studies, but they never became activists. And I don't think their values about militarism seem to move very much. It was just a course they took, and I don't think it impacted their lives. Tell me what your experience has been over the years as you watch different cohorts of university students come through your class.
That's an interesting question. I think the earlier ones in the early years maybe were more interested. Up until just this past year, it was kind of on the downslope. And then with the invasion of Ukraine, they got interested again. But the course I teach is, just to be, so you know what it is, I educated myself after a few years on the just war theory and the Catholic social teaching and Aquinas and all those other. And what I do then is I look at kind of like ancient applications of just war theory, and then with the new technologies like drones and artificial intelligence and neuroscience and all kind of really, really interesting technologies, see how if you apply those to a weapon, how or if it changes the way in which you apply just war theory. Jus ad bello, jus ad bellum, and try to get the students to sort of think their way through that. So what does it mean to put an artificial intelligence system into a decision-making toolbox?
Yeah.
Does it, is an artificial intelligence system even capable of making a decision about right intention or last resort or any of those kind of things? And it takes a while, I think, to get the students to start thinking along those terms. But once you get into the class and they kind of get used to asking the same questions again and again and again, by the time the course is over, they're actually pretty engaged in it.
Okay, so this is a more specific question than the general one of, are they more likely to become activists in the issues about, say, nuclear disarmament, that kind of thing? That's really what I was looking for quite often, because I was so, 35 years ago, so engaged with the nuclear disarmament movement that I didn't want to, it wouldn't have been right to try to pressure my students to come to marches with me or something.
Right.
But although I have colleagues who do now, they think the kids make them come to marches with them, which is the way it ought to be,
My students, I teach a section on Michael Walzer, Just Not Just Wars, and I use a lot of the stuff from the Vatican. But I think they all kind of come to the conclusion that nuclear weapons are evil, but I don't think any of them have become activists.
Well, that's the thing that has puzzled me. I have frankly, most of my friends who are in the peace movement, if there is such a thing anymore, are people who spend half their time saying, we've got to find ways of getting young people into our group. And I say, well, that's not their thing. It's, they're at a phase of their lives when they're going through a lot of different changes. And if they joined your group, which they will, they want to be making groups of their own and decide, if there's an issue that's important to them, they'll organize their own group, not join yours. Yeah. And that's probably the way it ought to be, because that's what their stage of life is. So wait a while, and when they get to be 65 and retire, then go after them, because then they're still smart enough and know some things and have some energy. And that's where you want to do your recruitment. But no, my friends don't take my word for that.
I view it as success when the students walk out the door understanding what just war theory and the laws of armed conflict and international humanitarian law are all about. And they have some sense of what, faced with a situation, what they might do or do differently than when they first walk through the door. So beyond that, I mean, I can't really. One of the things that draws them to the course is the fact that it's all the new stuff. You know,
Yeah,
they
okay.
like the new technologies. You know, old kind of wars really aren't with us much anymore anyway. So you get, you know, drones and all these new fancy weapons, and they get to hear about that. And at the same time, you know, we make them think their way through applying just war theory to it. And so it's kind of a good match.
Well, are there, are you dealing with people who contest the very notion of just war? I mean,
Who contest it?
oh, yeah.
No, no. I mean, I wrote a paper for an ethics journal a couple of years ago, and it was in response to a Vatican or a Catholic movement to get the Vatican to drop just war theory.
I see.
I mean, really radical group who thought that just war theory was being misapplied. And there's some value, there's probably some validity to that, but no, most of the people that I deal with are very strong proponents. I was just in the Vatican last week, and there was a whole conference basically in which we talked about just war theory and the laws of armed conflict, and nuclear weapons, and AI, and all that stuff. So, no, I think just war theory is here to stay.
Okay. But now tell me if I'm wrong. My impression is that Mayreed Maguire would not accept just war theory.
Who?
Mayreed Maguire, the Nobel Prize winning Irish woman who she and another woman, Betty somebody, were the two who tried hardest to get peace, you know, in Northern Ireland. She's definitely a Catholic, so I would have.
Well, there's again, I mean, I'm not a real expert on this. I just know that
I remember hearing her say, I will never kill another human being under any circumstances. Meaning, you know, if they're going to kill me, okay, let them, but I'm not going to kill them.
Okay, and that's certainly her right. I mean, they're on the spectrum. You got people who are conscientious objectors. You got people who don't like just war theory because they think it's misapplied. You got people who do like it. You know, I think there's some truth to the fact that you can always, or you not always, you could, if you try hard enough, you can get just war theory to fit pretty much any kind of conflict. But properly applied, I think it works. Right. And so a lot of the people who are arguing that, you know, they don't like just war theory are arguing on the basis of the fact that, you know, you can just use it to justify war, which I don't believe. I still think it has a lot of value, particularly the jus in bello portions.
Say that again. In bello what?
In bello portions of it, you know, the justice in war rather than justice in going to war.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, right now that is there are all kinds of questions about that, because here's where we get into your new technologies. I'm about to go to press with the next issue of Peace Magazine, and we have a not very long article, but quite a condensed exposition of the use of AI in the Ukraine war and the new systems that they have for surveillance by drones, and more than just surveillance, way various technologies. So the things that you probably spend most of your time thinking about. Now, clearly, there are ethical issues that come up with all of those things, and I don't know anything about the debates about how people who are serious about trying to find how just war theory would apply to answering these questions, how those conversations go. Maybe you can sort of bring me up to date on.
Well, I think they're fairly almost deceptively simple. The argument goes that if there's a weapon, an armed weapon that can kill somebody, the decision to kill should not be made by the weapon itself. It should be made by a person.
Mhm.
That gets into things like, a human being is a moral agent, and only a moral agent can kill a moral agent. And, there are a lot of people who argue that using drones in warfare is somehow wrong. I don't buy that. And we've been fighting at a distance for
Mhm.
millennia. And a lot of the times those weapons are not very discriminate. Artillery doesn't care who it kills when it lands.
Mhm.
So fighting with the drone that's maybe a lot more accurate probably is a good thing. Again, it boils down to whether or not the final decision to kill is made by the machine or by the human. My concern about AI really lies less in battlefield weapons than it does in command and control systems. So, if you've got a command and control system that's out there collecting information and collecting information and collecting information, and then doing something with the computer and making a recommendation, that's one thing, and a human being makes a decision. But if you let the machine actually decide, then that's where I have a problem with it. So,
Well, sure. I think let's concede that right off the bat. I think most people would say that now, wouldn't they? Most people would say we don't want to make those autonomous, the weapons completely autonomous.
I don't know. I don't know about most people.
Yeah.
If you're on the battlefield, you might not have time to make all those decisions. So again,
you're okay. Here's where we come to, if you have a choice between using something that you're not supposed to use, but it'll work, versus saying, well, in this case, I can't use it, even though it's going to make me lose the war.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is maybe a situation that is now confronting more and more of the Ukrainian military commanders.
Again, I don't know about that. I'm trying to go back to your question about AI and autonomous systems. I think it's very simple at some point. If you're on a battlefield and you are absolutely certain that the only people who are facing you are also soldiers, there's no question of discrimination, no question of killing innocent people, there's no question of collateral damage, none of that, then the concept of using an autonomous system, an autonomous weapon system, it basically is just another tool in the commander's toolbox. If, on the other hand, there's any question at all about being able to discriminate civilians and protect innocent people and avoid collateral damage, then those kind of weapons shouldn't be used. And that's one way to look at it. But you know, from the military point of view, I mean, unless it is a weapon like poison gas or blinding lasers or any of those other things that are considered to be evil, Malaman say, then you know, the military commander really needs to be able to use all the tools at his disposal. What I don't know what to think about this, the use of cluster bombs.
Well, I was just going to come to that because I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking about unless it's lasers or you know, mutilating poison gas or something. I don't know. You know, I try to fit my head into that kind of logic of saying there's some kind of weapons that are good and some kind of weapons that are bad, but I have a hard time with that.
Well,
I mean, to me, any of them, if you're going to kill somebody, well, I guess the best thing would be to at least get it over with quickly so they don't suffer too much. But
Yeah,
apart from, you know, so poison gas is bad in that sense, and
well,
cluster bombs are bad because the cows might walk on them later.
or children.
Yeah, for children. So you can make some distinctions, but in general, I think, you know, if you're going to kill somebody, then that's bad enough. You don't have to worry about what kind of tool you use.
Well, I disagree with that. I disagree with that. I mean, I've looked into the evolution of the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions and the St. Petersburg Convention and all of those conventions. And really what they are trying to do is they're trying to prevent unnecessary suffering.
Okay,
So, you know, it's
I concede I'm wrong. I will admit that I'm wrong, but I have a hard time.
well, yeah,
I get it.
but if you're in the military and you're on a battlefield and the other guy's trying to kill you, then, you know, you're, according to the war convention, you know, you're both legitimate combatants and you go about your own thing. What you don't need to do is to rip his body apart with exploding bullets or blind him and send him home so that he spends the rest of his life blind, or leave behind things that are going to kill children for decades. You know, it's just that kind of thinking is, if war is war, you know, you're going to go kill people, go ahead and do it, but don't do it in such a way as you make them just feel pain for the rest of their lives. I mean, that's inhumane.
All right.
And those are the kind of things that I talk about in the class.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And but you say, let's say, what happens to a student in the class? They come in, they haven't thought about this before. And does this turn into something where they go through some sort of soul searching process, or is it just another?
Well, I don't know. And that's a good question. I've been teaching this class for about 10 years, and every year I have at least one student who 3 or 4 years later gets in touch with me. I've had several who kept in touch with me for 2 or 3 years afterwards. But I had one just recently that said he was 5 years ago, he took my class, and now he's working for a defense contractor. And he said, you know, we're doing some things that it made me think about your class. And I said, oh, that's great. Good. If what I told you 5 years ago made you left enough of an impression that you're now thinking about it again, I'd consider that success. So I think to answer your question is, every year there are a couple who kind of see the light. 90% of them probably just.
Now let's talk about these new intelligence gathering things. Oh yeah, you can't talk about that. I don't know what the rules are about what we can talk about, but certainly there are new things being used in Ukraine that can be discussed, because this woman has written an article for our next issue about these these technologies. She even uses some language. She refers to something called the Delta platform, which is a military tech situational awareness system, greenlit for implementation in February 23. And the Ukraine is using it to gather data and intelligence on Russian troop movements. At a fraction of the cost of systems developed by major militaries, the Ukrainian startup developed Kropyvka software after the Russian invasion, and it provides a digital battlefield map, etc. Now, are any of these? She also talks about something called Palantir, Palantir.
I know of Palantir.
Yeah. And tell me, well, are any of these technologies questionable to you in terms of the ethics?
No, in general, no.
Okay.
I don't know those systems that she was referring to, and if I did, I probably wouldn't be able to talk about them anyway. But what I know and what I gather from what's happening over there is that the Ukrainians are being very innovative. So they're taking commercial systems and modifying them, putting cameras on drones. And that Palantir is the name of a company. And Palantir is big into just that, collecting huge amounts of data and using artificial intelligence to analyze it and so on, and then turn around and present the results of that to the commander. So they need some way to understand what's going on the battlefield. Ukraine does not have, or maybe they do have now, I don't know, but I don't think Ukraine has, large intelligence gathering systems. So if they could put something together in a hurry with commercial systems and buying software from Palantir, I think it's great. Where I began to worry is if they're doing that as a situational awareness tool for the battlefield commander, who then makes the decisions, I'm good with that. Because he can make a decision otherwise. He can say, I don't believe what the system's telling me. If, on the other hand, they're allowing the machine to make the decisions, or they're basically just looking at the decisions the machine is recommending and rubber stamping them, I have a problem with that. So, but no, I think what they're doing is we may actually be able to learn something from them, being able to quickly take commercial systems and modify them for whatever use we want. That's a good thing.
Well, let's go back to cluster bombs, because there was, I think even Canada said, no, the US shouldn't have okayed that. But now, as I understand it, there's a newer, not necessarily newer, but the US is willing for the first time to give some kind of, what do I want to call it? A gun, anyway, that will shoot farther and be able to send these cluster bombs farther into Russian territory. They weren't willing to do that until recently. So it's like the last few days or week or so that they've approved that, right? We've already mentioned the question of the ethics of cluster bombs in general. How do you come down on that and try to apply? How would you sift through it using just war theory?
Well, I wouldn't really have to sift through it. I mean, cluster bombs and landmines, particularly in the kind of combat that's going on there, I just don't agree with. I was not asked my opinion, and
Mhm.
The United States and Russia and the big guys didn't sign the landmine treaty. They
Mhm.
didn't sign cluster bomb,
Yeah.
but I don't make U.S. government policy. I don't think they're right.
Mhm.
Kind of going back to my earlier comment, if it were a battlefield, you generally think of, World War I with the, large stretches of trench warfare and those kind of things. Maybe because it would give us an advantage. I don't know, but the type of war that's being fought in Ukraine is being fought. Cities are being attacked, and when you start dispensing cluster bombs and landmines in populated areas, you're just asking for trouble.
Mhm. Well,
So,
now if you, I mean, they say they need them now. They need them, and that puts us back to the question that I was trying to imagine a while ago. If you had them, if you were in the field and you needed them because you're going to lose your battle if you don't use them, and you have nothing that's equally good that you feel you could feel confident using, then that's where you would feel the moral dilemma, wouldn't it? You'd be questioning, shall I go ahead and let them win the battle or the war? Or shall I go ahead and use this thing that I don't really
yeah,
believe in?
yeah. And the commander on the ground has to look at the situation and say, if I fire this weapon and there are cluster bombs, what is the chance that I'm going to kill innocent civilians?
Mhm.
So he makes a calculation. What is the chance that, some of them aren't going to go off and they're going to be left behind? They're going to kill a child. So he makes that calculation. And he does a utilitarian consequentialist type calculation that says, do I not do it and let them overrun me, or do I do it and then accept, these downsides? And my guess is that the commander is going to accept the downsides and go ahead and employ the weapon.
Mhm.
I mean, that's
Well, all that already presupposes that you have a good reason to be at war, that it is a
Mhm.
just war, that
That's true.
that it's ethical to be doing whatever you're trying to
Mhm.
accomplish.
Mhm.
And that, of course, I don't know how much that's contested in your circles. I wouldn't imagine as much as there is in the communities of peaceniks that I
Mhm.
frequent. But certainly I have the impression that maybe half or more of the peace workers or peace activists that I know in Canada and globally are of the mind that nobody should be supporting Ukraine, and that probably Ukraine should accept whatever terms Russia requires in order to put an end and have a ceasefire. And this is, I've been such a peace oriented person that almost in throughout my life, every war I see, I've found a reason to say this is not, we shouldn't be fighting it. But in this case, I have a hard time saying that Ukraine should just let Putin have what he wants. And I really, it's been the most painful
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
moral issue for me that I've had to deal with in terms of the justice of the war for much of my adult life. I can't think of any war that has left me so troubled about it.
Yeah. Well, it was a brazen attack. Um, at some point, Ukraine may have to make a calculation that says we're not going to get back what we've lost. I don't know. That'll be their calculation. But you're certainly your group of people has, every right to feel how they do. I think they're fighting. even according to all the just war theory that I've ever read, they've been attacked. They're within their rights to defend themselves. So that would be theoretically would be considered a just war on their part. Not on the part of the Russians, but
No.
again, I don't know. The government doesn't ask my opinions.
Mhm. Do you find, I haven't seen a poll. I would really like to see several polls because I imagine it's changing over time. But I particularly would love to see a poll of people who are peace activists to see what proportion of them seem to be of the mind that I'm encountering so widely now, people who believe that, well, the US caused it, it was a US provocation, and therefore Russia's within its rights and blah, blah, blah. But I think a very significant number of people that I know have that kind of point of view. And I just have such a hard time with it because I think, I can't even say, well, let's get a ceasefire under any terms we can get it, because I think, the reality is if there were a ceasefire, I believe that Putin would use the opportunity to go for,
That's what you're referring to. I think they're the provocation with the expansion of NATO.
Mhm.
So NATO expanded. NATO didn't force those countries to join NATO. They joined NATO on their own.
They wanted it very much.
And it doesn't matter how close they got to the Russian border. None of that was a sufficient provocation
I agree.
for Putin to attack Ukraine in the brutal way in which they did it. It's just so again, your friends are entitled to their opinions, but I don't agree with them.
Well, I would agree with them that probably some of those countries shouldn't have been allowed to join, although that even there is I understand why they wanted to join, and time has proven that they had every reason to be worried. So there was well-founded concern. But at the same time, I thought at the time, if anything, that NATO should have folded the same way that WTO folded. When they ended the Warsaw Treaty Organization, NATO should have reciprocated, but that didn't happen. And I would have thought, they should have turned everything over to the OSCE, which was, I think it was still the CSCE at that point. But that would have been a better solution for security arrangements in Europe, and one that was indeed not provocative. So I think that the US did make a bad decision, but it's not bad enough decision to justify in any sense
Perhaps,
what has happened. Yeah. But that's you and me. I don't even know how much of that you would feel. But as of now, how do we get out of it? Well, I don't know, because I think, if they'd just taken the Minsk accords or agreements, if they'd lived up to that, it would sure have been better than what we've got now. That looks like wonderful in hindsight. You never get as good a deal as that again.
Sadly, I think it's going to grind on for a while.
Yeah. Well, it will if the US keeps giving them money. But if they're not going to give them money, how long is it going to go on?
Good question.
Not money, but weapons. What do you think?
What's that?
If the Republicans win and the right-wing Republicans win and say cut off all funding to Ukraine, that's the end of the war, isn't it?
I don't think it would be immediate. I think they were doing pretty well before we started ramping up a lot of our weapons and money. Yeah, at the end of the day, they were without the weapons, without the ammunition. I don't know. I don't know what NATO, if the US backs off, Germany is in the crosshairs. Poland, all those countries, who knows, they may step up. It's kind of hard for me to say. But no, it's kind of hard for me to say.
My only hope would be other things that might go on besides the question of the military power. And that would be what's going on inside Russia in terms of the Russian economy and so on, because I think the Russian economy is set to have a huge collapse. And not that I know enough about economics to have that opinion, but some of the people I know do.
Mhm.
And I think that the prospects of a real economic collapse in the Russian economy are fairly significant. So something like that could, if people begin to realize they can't even find food or can't
Mhm.
afford to buy bread in Russia, then they might get off their duff. But otherwise, I think most Russians are completely passive.
Not like Americans, right?
Oh, that's a good comparison. That's really an interesting comparison. I don't know. How different do you think they are from Americans?
The normal, common, everyday person, probably not all that different. I
Hmm.
mean, people want to live their lives. They want to have families. They want to have safety. They want to have food to eat, shelter over their heads. How they think about their governments. A lot of times I think people get complacent about their government, and they basically just let the government do whatever the government wants to do. So,
Well, there's the people who are not complacent are the people who support, these right-wing people in Congress. They're going to shut down the government.
yep. I probably don't want to get into politics, but yeah, you're right.
Well, I guess we've covered the subject. I wish I could end with some hopeful new idea of a solution so we wouldn't have to even be talking about just the war theory, because the occasion for war would have been, we'd have a solution to that, so that with good governance, global governance, and a new world order, we would not have to worry about having wars anymore. I don't think we've quite got there
I
today.
think we've got a ways to go yet.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
Good wishes for continuing to do what you're doing, because it sounds like everybody should be giving some thought to these new technologies and certainly to the ethics of using them. So
Well,
carry on.
thank you.
Thank you.
Nice. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye
Bye.
now.